After 2 years of research and deliberation, it appears that the mass graves in Canada were a lie. Religious institutions across Canada burned to the ground for absolutely nothing on the fundamental of a lie pushed by the progressive activist class, all because they deemed that there were mass graves buried underneath schools on Indigenous land in Canada to cover up atrocities committed by the Canadian government and Canadian religious institutions. This is insane. This was pushed consistently throughout the mainstream media, endlessly, without fail. They never stopped. They never questioned it. They just pushed the narrative. And this is a perfect example of how the media works. Let's go ahead and get into this. From the BBC, more churches burned down on Canada's Indigenous land. This is June 27th of 2021, so this is 2 years ago roughly. 2 more Catholic churches have burned down in Indigenous communities in Western Canada early on Saturday. The fires at St. Anne's Church and the Chopaka Church began within an hour of each other in British Columbia. Officers said both buildings were completely destroyed and they were treating the fires as suspicious. Yeah, absolutely suspicious, because it was done by activists. Also, these are the same people that will sit there and screech about climate change, but they'll set a church on fire and send all of those emissions into the sky. Just a thought. Last Monday, 2 other Catholic churches in the province were destroyed in fires as Canada marked National Indigenous Peoples Day. The investigations into the previous fires and these 2 new fires are ongoing with no arrests or charges, Royal Canadian Mounted Police Sergeant Jason Biota said. It comes after hundreds of unmarked graves were discovered at sites of former residential schools in Canada, which we now know is not true. The government-funded compulsory schools were run by religious groups in the 19th and 20th century with the aim of assimilating Indigenous youth. Indigenous groups have demanded a nationwide search for more graves. So, given the process of thinking that there were mass graves under these schools, that's an understandable thing, that you would want to actually have a nationwide search for more mass graves. But you would think that this nationwide search would have been pushed, I don't know, with a modicum of evidence. So, here we see 3 articles that I'm not going to go into. I will leave them in the description for you below if you would like to check them out. Why Canada is mourning the deaths of 215 children, giving a voice to the missing and murdered women, the truth about Canada's cultural genocide. The Indian band chief, Keith Crow, told public broadcaster at CBC he had received a call early in the morning saying the Chopaka Church was set on fire. It was burned to the ground by the time he had arrived an hour later. I'm angry, the chief told CBC. I don't see any positive coming from this, and it's going to be tough. So, the people that cared so much about Indigenous people burned down an Indigenous people's Catholic church. How fascinating. Clearly they care so much about these people. And it's also the biggest thing that it goes to show. These are usually not the smartest people. They usually don't have a brain. They just see something that they believe is a moral cause, and because they want to be good people, they do something because they believe it's just, no matter how heinous the action. It says many in the community are Catholic church members and are very upset about the blaze, he said. And this is absolutely true, because we saw this with numerous churches that were set ablaze in Canada. Many of them were set up by Indigenous institutions and were solely run by Indigenous families. And that was like a large portion of the congregation. And what happened? You were burning their churches down because you said you cared about the children that they lost. Yeah, quite interesting. So, deaths in Canada's compulsory boarding schools were due in large part to the squalid health conditions outside. The students were often housed in poorly built, poorly heated, unsanctioned facilities. There were apparently 751 unmarked graves at a former residential school in Saskatchewan. The Marville Indian Residential School was also operated by the Roman Catholic Church. So people are freaking out because these are religious institutions. But at the same time, it also goes with the comment that Nietzsche said, God is dead and we have killed him. And the whole fundamental behind this comment was, if God is now dead in the eyes of the society that was built around the fundamental orientation, around being built around the idea of God, well, what is it that society will revere, and what is it that they will put in the place of what they once held God to? Which means, what is it that they will revere to such an idolatrous status? So, it says between 1863 and 1998, more than 1,500 or 150,000 Indigenous children were taken from their families and placed in these schools throughout Canada. A commission launched in 2008 to document the impact of the system found that large numbers of Indigenous children had never returned to their home communities. The commission's landmark report said they had practiced amount to cultural genocide. The Canadian government has formally apologized for the system. And here's the deal. If it was actually like removing children from the capacity to connect to their actual culture and then they never were delivered back to their families, that's wrong. And I could see how you could make the argument for cultural genocide in that way. But there was never an argument to say that there was cultural genocide in the sense that they were killing large portions of children and burying them to hide the atrocities. Let's go ahead and jump into this article. I'm going to make it a jump cut for just a second because I'm going to let a cat in. I'm sure you can hear her meowing. The cat is over there. Okay. No human remains found 2 years after claims of mass graves in Canada. What do we have here? After 2 years of horror stories about the alleged mass graves of Indigenous children at residential schools across Canada, a series of recent excavations at suspected sites has turned up no human remains. They were burning down churches in mass, many of which were churches that were made for these Indigenous people because they were Catholic. So you're burning down Indigenous Catholic churches because you're saying you care so much about the dead Indigenous children, which turned out to not even be real. They didn't actually die. Wow. What a noble person you are to go and commit arson because you thought that... Oh my God. Unbelievable. Some academics and politicians say it's further evidence that the stories are unproven. Take note of this statement. Some academics and politicians say. The fact that they can't just say, this is further evidence to prove and corroborate the fact that these stories are unproven because there is no justification to show that this is actually true. But no, they have to say some academics and politicians say to infer the fact that there are some academics and politicians that disagree and say this isn't true. Well, the fact is we're talking about facts. And because of that, you should be giving the information bluntly, but that's not how the corporate press works. It's always got to obfuscate the narrative just a little bit. It says a group of Indigenous people, also known as the Pine Creek First Nation, excavated 14 sites in the basement of Our Lady of Seven Sorrows Catholic Church near the Pine Creek Residential School in Manitoba during 4 weeks this summer. The so-called anomalies were first detected using ground-penetrating radar, but on August 18th, Chief Derek Nepanak of the remote Pine Creek Indian Reserve said that no remains were found whatsoever. Burning down churches based on a lie. He also referred to this effort as an initial excavation, leading some who were skeptical of the origins to think even more has been planned. And we're going to go ahead and play this video now, and this is effectively debasing the side of a church. This one they didn't actually burn down, and they're also just like spray painting on this. I guess it's a figurehead of Canadian history. I don't know anything about Canadian history. It's not interesting enough for me to care about it. Just quite honest, I'm just more concerned about the fact of when we invade Canada, what will the United States make it look like? So here we see is the fact that these people are just spray painting, dig them up, stop the colonial genocide, return them home, go home colonizer, all of this different stuff. And also, if that's the case, you've been colonized. They're not going home. This is their home now. But here we see the guy continues to say, I don't like to use the word hoax, but it's too strong out there to be putting out so many falsehoods circulating about this issue with zero evidence. A professor of emeritus in the Department of History of University told Montreal this post Wednesday. So, nonetheless, he welcomes more excavations because of the enormous adverse publicity and the stain left on Canada after the first reports of the alleged mass graves. This has been a very dark year for Canada. We need more excavations so we can know the truth. Too much was said and decided upon before there was any proof. Fully agree. You shouldn't jump to major conclusions and commit arson before you have any factual evidence of anything. I would argue you just shouldn't be committing arson and destroying property and committing property crime. In May 2021, the leaders of the British Columbia First National Band announced that the discovery of the mass graves of more than 200 Indigenous children detected via ground-penetrating radar at a residential school in British Columbia. The radar found anomalies in the soil, but no proof of actual human remains. Unbelievable. Like, it's just unbelievable. We had a knowing in our community that we were able to verify. To our knowledge, these missing children were undocumented deaths. So because of that, they immediately jumped to the fact is that, well, there's 150,000 children that attended these schools, and there's a large portion of children that went missing and died, so that must mean that they buried them and they committed a genocide. No. The argument when people make the fact is that they're saying they committed a cultural genocide because they detached people from their heritage and wouldn't let children see their families and interact with their culture. That is a solid argument for saying that you've committed a cultural genocide. Not by actually executing people, but by removing them and detaching them from the thing that gave them their structure, that makes their family, and makes their culture. So, what we see is the system forcibly separated children from their families for extended periods of time and forbade them to acknowledge their Indigenous heritage and the culture to speak their own language. This could be seen as an Indigenous genocide, and I can totally understand this because this would be effectively excommunicating people from their culture without their decision. That is incredibly wrong. If that's what happened, that's horrible. But nonetheless, that's not committing a genocide and burying the bodies of hundreds of children, so it giving you the reason to go burn down churches of the people that you claim you care about. Even Pope Francis issued an apology on behalf of the Catholic Church, which ran many of the residential school facilities, and asked for God's forgiveness. asking for God's forgiveness based on a lie. I'm going to go ahead and end it there. I've messed up this recording so many times just based on the fact that I've fumbled my words. There we go. Perfect example once again. I'm going to cut it there. Thank you for watching. I can't believe the fact is that we've actually discovered that this was a lie, which I didn't buy this in the first place, not because I didn't believe it was possible, but because there was just no evidence to show that it was true. It's more than possible. Look at what the Americans did to the Native Americans. Look at what we did to the Native Americans after we persecuted them. That's 100 million people gone. 100 million people. That's the equivalent of what the Russians lost in World War II. That is a genocide. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for watching. Give this a thumbs up if you liked it, a thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. It's quite funny to see the corporate press have to come out and straight up say, look, we were pushing absolute lies and we may have actually caused harm to the people that we intended to do good for. Yeah, what a shocker. This is what happens when you go ahead and push narratives without factual basis. That's all I've got. Thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong. Stay lovely, stay great, peace out.